Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with some DFS value plays for this week's Travelers Championship. Earlier today, took a look at the top end of the Draftkings pricing. Well, now time to buckle down, get our gloves on because we got to get our hands dirty with these value plays. Gonna do some dumpster diving, gonna try and uncover those diamonds in the rough, save you guys some salary for your GPP lineups, and also give you some much needed leverage to go out there and maybe bank one of those large field contests. Anytime we have an elevated field like we have this week, you're always going to want to spend a little bit of extra salary. So when you're down there in that 6 and 7K range, you might have to go a little bit further down the board than you'd hope for. So all four of these players are going to be $7,500 and below. So even lowering my value tier mark from the 8,000 down to 75, and also have one in the middle of the 6K range that is really going to help you open up some salary. So a bunch to get into. Let's go ahead and start it off with our first value of the week. If you take a look at TPC River Highlands' scorecard and you see how many wedges are going to be in play, doesn't it just scream Matt Kuchar to you? A course where it's about precision over power off the tee and where you have to make your fair share of putts. And oh, to mention, Ben Poa, one of the best surfaces on all of the tour for Matt Kuchar. So really, it seems like the stars are aligning for Kuch to go out there and at least get himself in the top 25, which he's proven to be a reliable, top 25 machine this year. And on top of that, he's had some top 5, top 10 upside, and at $7,500, but you don't need him to win this golf tournament, right? You probably don't even need him to top 5, especially for some of the smaller field single entry kind of stuff. A top 10, even maybe a top 20 might be enough to get the job done, and I think he's got the skills to get there. So first off, last 12 measured rounds haven't been that great for Kuchar. It's why he's a little bit cheaper, so that's worth noting. That's maybe the one red flag with this play, but the more you zoom out on Kuch, the better the stats are going to look. So you can see gaining across all 4 stat categories. If you look at his season-long proximity buckets, he's in the top 20 of all the different wedge ranges, which from the eye test we know is always going to be the case, right? With that short game, there's pretty much no better player on tour than Kuch. He's excellent around the green, was, I believe, the leader in around the green percentage just a few weeks ago on tour. May have given that up a little bit. You can see isn't as stout over the last 12 measured rounds, but is still easily in the top 5 of that department, and with some tricky around the green shots at this course up there in Cromwell, it's worth having that skill set as well. So I like the skill set fit. Like the Ben Poa numbers, the recent form isn't great, but that's why we're getting a low-owned Matt Kuchar here, right? You can see cut, top 20, okay, right? Made the cut, that's not all that great. Missed cut, T43, so hasn't really been popping of late, right? You're not getting that top 10 upside, but now that's letting us get Kuch at 2.5% ownership. There were slates where he was in the 8, sometimes even the 9K range in weaker fields, and was garnering in the 15 to 25% range. That's pretty ludicrous for Kuch, right? You don't want to be spending all that salary. You don't want to be playing him when he's mega chalk out there, but when we get him at a short positional kind of golf course at low ownership, and I think a very fair price tag at $7,500, that's the exact kind of opportunity that I like to pounce on. Next up, we've got Tom Hoge, and if you're looking for recent form, kind of like a Kuch, you kind of want to look for some of the other options, but much like a Matt Kuchar, that's why we're getting him a little bit cheaper than he probably should be, and I think $7,200 is more than fair enough for Tom Hoge, and also only 2.8% owned, because much like Kuchar, when you look at some of the proximity buckets for this season, Tom Hoge is top 15 in all of those categories. In fact, I believe is number 1 from 100 to 125 yards, just showing an elite skill set in that category, and the form ain't much better, right? This is why the ownership's going to be tempered. This is why not that many people are going to get there, but it's almost entirely been the putter, right? Losing 1.2 strokes per round. So when we look at the actual results, that's why it is as ugly as what it looks like, right? Missed cut, 65th, 52nd, 58th place. And a lot of that's come on Saturday, Sunday. He's been out of contention, maybe just made the cut on the number like he has in a lot of circumstances, and they gotten off to that slow start on Saturday. You tend to get a little bit disinterested, maybe, play around with shots that you wouldn't normally hit. And then on Sunday, right, if you're even more so behind the 8 ball, which Hoge has been for the last month or so, you're even more disinterested. So I think some of these results are a little bit deceiving, right? The iron play's still been there. He's been on a lot of featured groups, and I can tell you from just watching it in person, I mean, even at the US Open, that this guy's playing a lot better than most people would give him credit for. So missed cut last week. I can tell you the irons didn't really look all that bad. You can see a few other, 65th, 52nd. He's at least making the weekend, right? So like, I know the stats aren't sexy by any means, but the guy's playing a lot better than I think most people realize, especially if you're only using your modeling for your decision-making process. Right? He's number 130 recent form ranking. He's 65th in terms of your course fit model over here. Those aren't metrics that are, making me want to go run and play a Tom Hoge. It's more knowing that he's maybe the best wedge player that we have in all of the 7K range, let alone somebody at low ownership and pretty reasonable price tag there too. So I'm a Hoge truther. I don't play him every single week by any means, but when we get at this kind of track, kind of like I was screaming to go out there and play a Matt Kuchar, I kind of knew I was going to be playing a lot of Tom Hoge this week as well. Before we hop into the last two plays, I'll remind you for access for all of my projections, all of the sheets that you see in my videos, all my showdown stuff, prop stuff, check out my Patreon page. There's a link down below. It is $10 a month, one of the best values that you'll find around the industry. And you get access to the Discord server. You can ask me, others in the community questions. We share a lot of info in there. Sweat out bets, of course. Just interact, have a good time down there, and check all of that out with the Patreon page. Again, $10 a month. There's a link in the description of the video. But with that aside, let's get into these last two sleeper plays, value plays, we'll say. By the way, weekly live stream, that will be Wednesday at 7 p.m. That'll be at the usual time slot, even with content dropping later. Okay, plugs aside. Brendan Todd, $7,100. Another player that at a short wedge fest is always going to pop in your modeling, right? You look at Brendan Todd, you look at the kind of courses that he excels at, Mayakoba, right? A Sony Open. You've seen him have success at a few other tracks like Pebble Beach, even just this year, right there with the top 5 finish. And you get him at a course this week where he's going to be hitting a lot of shots in his wheelhouse, where, much like the first two plays we've gone through, and you can tell this is going to be a key similarity, even with our play down there in the 6K range that we're getting to, is I'm really trying to hone in on those iron ranges, right? Iron's probably the most important stack, pretty much no matter what course you're at, but especially at the Travelers, you got to be a good wedge player. Brendan Todd checks that box emphatically. He's top 35 on tour in all the wedge ranges. You take a look at the recent form metrics, they haven't been, otherworldly by any means, but still gaining from fairway in. You like to see it. Never going to be the best off the tee player, but luckily for him, only has a 6,500 yard golf course, so that's sweet. Doesn't have to worry about it all that much. You take a look at the last 36 rounds, it's the same story, right? Gains from fairway in, and you can see it's just a marginal gainer with the approach play, but now that we have him at a track where he's hitting maybe even just double the amount of wedge shots that you're hitting for most weeks on tour, he's going to have a much better chance to go out there and gain significantly with the iron play. So I like all of that from him. He's been very consistent. He's been making some cuts. You take a look at the recent form, it's why he's maybe a little bit cheaper. 34th, WD, 57th, missed cut. Before that was on an absolute tear. So if he was coming in that same stretch of form, he would be much more chalky on a week like this, because I think people know that he's such a good course fit at this kind of track. He'd also be a lot more expensive, right? He'd probably be towards the middle to the top of the 7K range where he was just a month ago. So kind of like a Kuch, right? You don't play a Brendan Todd when he's chalky, when he's too expensive. You play him when he's towards the bottom of the 7K range, maybe even in the 6K range, like he tends to dip into from time to time. I mean, you play him at low ownership, and we have all of that working for us right now at just 3.8% projected owned. And our last play, we got to go way down here, guys. As a guy we haven't talked about in a long time, but I was a Ben Griffin truther when he first came out, right? We played him plenty of times when people didn't even know who this kid was. And it feels like a lot of people have forgotten about him, right? He's $6,500, has not had the best recent stretch of form, but much like our first three players, if you look at some of the proximity buckets, he's top 40 on tour in all of the short buckets. You take a look at the tracks where he's played well. RSM Classic, right? Another short kind of track. Pretty much all of his top 25s, all of his pop performances, especially a lot of the tracks during the fall swing when he found so much success, right? Are tracks where you don't have to bang driver on every hole, right? Most of them are 7,100 yards and below. If you sort this field by just shots gained at those kind of golf courses, he's top 10 in this field. And that's including all of the studs, right? Now, small sample size, right? Really constricting down, kind of cherry picking the stats there per se, right? Going after a Ben Griffin. But all of those are reasons to play this kid. He's 1.9% owned. No one's going to play him out there. And if you take a look at the last 36 round baseline, right? We zoom out a little bit, right? Try and get an idea for like what's been going wrong lately. It's been just slightly worse than average ball striking, right? Marginally losing off the tee, right? Losing 0.3 strokes per round with the approach play. He's still gaining a bunch around the green. We know he's a short game wizard, right? When he's gaining, he can gain over a stroke per round around the green. And the putter has been there too, right? But he's typically a little bit better with the putter too, right? But like when he's rolling, he's gaining normally over a stroke per round with the flat stick. So maybe a little bit dull with the short game, right? Not his typical, like one of the best players even in this elevated kind of field. But then the ball striking, right? Well, off the tee this week, right? He's not hitting many drivers, so we can feel pretty decent about the off the tee play, right? It's going to be minimized at least a little bit around the Travelers. And then we have the approach play, right? Remember, he's top 40 on tour on all of those wedge proximity buckets. Ben Griffin has a real good chance to gain a bunch of strokes on approach this week, I would say. If he continues to have that stout short game, you're not only looking at somebody that can just make the cut, which at $6,500 is pretty much all we're looking for at this point. Like that's going to be nearly enough in most large field tournaments. I think he's got top 25 or top 15 upside too. So I love him in large field tournaments, especially because he's not getting any ownership, right? He's 1.9% owned. Now, maybe I'm talking him up here in the 1,000 or so people that watch this video. Maybe half of them or a third of them end up going out there and playing him in their lineups. It might have a slight impact on the ownership, but it's not like you're going to get a chalky Ben Griffin, right? Because I'm talking him up in this single YouTube video. So he's a pick I wanted to keep close to the chest. I don't know if I wanted to put it out there to the masses, but here we are, right? Got to give you guys the goods. So $6,500, he is definitely my top value play on the slate because with, pricing considered, skill set considered, checks almost every box that I'm looking for. And it's, kind of a trend across these four players too, right? There's a reason why they're low owned, right? There's a reason why they're a little bit cheaper than they probably should be. Their form coming in isn't the greatest. So if you're in a single entry kind of contest, I might advise against playing a Ben Griffin, right? I might even be a little bit hesitant to get to, maybe not Brendan Todd. Brendan Todd, I feel pretty good getting to, right? The form's been there. He's been a top 50 player in this field. That makes sense. But like a Hoagie, right? Remember, he was like number 130 in terms of form. Like a Matt Kuchar, I probably feel okay within a cash too. Just some of these, a little bit more risky options, we'll call them. You might want to be a little bit more hesitant about in those single entries. But, the Brendan Todds, the Matt Kuchar of the world, I feel great about in those sort of contests. So just keep all those things in mind, right? Most of these videos, especially these, core plays, value play kind of videos, are more catered towards GPPs. And the Ben Griffins, the Tom Hoagies, right, at essentially no ownership, are the nuts plays in those sort of contests where you got to get the top lineup out of 150,000 entries. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the value plays this week. Before you're hopping out of here, go ahead, smash that like button for me, but also go ahead and comment down below who you're taking as your top value price $7,500 and below. For me, you guys already know the answer. I absolutely love Ben Griffin this week. He's way cheap down the board, so don't say I'm not being creative out here, but I would love to hear your thoughts, right? Whether it's maybe a little bit of a chalkier guy like a Mark Hubbard, I totally get it from the irons perspective. Maybe it's a little bit more outside the box. Whatever the case is, go ahead, fire that down in chat. Appreciate you guys. Best of luck with those lineups, any outright bets that you're going with. Like I mentioned at the halfway point, check out all my content on my Patreon page. It goes a huge way towards supporting the channel as well. And make sure to set a reminder for that live stream tomorrow night. It'll be at Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern time. You guys know the drill. Covering everything you need to know heading into the week. And of course, covering all your questions too. Until then, best of luck, and I'll catch you guys for the stream.